Julian Price was 43 years old, a man who had made a great deal of money and spent most of his energy making sure no one could tell. He drove himself most days, in a plain sedan, and only used the car and the driver for the events where being seen mattered. He wore a watch that cost less than the suit, and a suit that cost less than people assumed. That spring, his wife told him she had fallen in love with someone real, someone who worked with his hands and looked at her the way Julian no longer did. The someone was Theo, the driver Julian's company kept on retainer. She said it like a confession and a victory at once. She had no idea that Theo was Julian's employee, that the car Theo drove was Julian's, and that nearly everything she believed she was trading up to reach already belonged to the man she was leaving. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was quiet at 5:50 that morning, the particular quiet of a place where one person is awake and moving carefully so the other can keep sleeping. Julian made his coffee in the dark and did not turn on the kitchen light. Julian had spent 17 years building a private holding company that owned things people used every day without knowing who owned them. A regional car service, a facilities management firm, a staffing company, a commercial property group. He had structured all of it so that the man at the top was invisible. No public boards, no name on the buildings, managers who ran each company as if there were no owner at all. Because Julian had learned early that people behave honestly when they believe no one who matters is watching. The car service that employed Theo was one of his. Theo did not know it. Almost no one did. He was the kind of man who would rather be underestimated than admired, because underestimation told him the truth about people, and admiration only told him what they wanted. When he married Camille 4 years ago, she had been a luxury brand sales associate with a hunger for the life she sold to other people. Julian had given it to her without making a show of it: the apartment, the travel, the standing she'd wanted. He had funded the small styling business she launched and let quietly fade. He never made her feel indebted. He built the floor under her comfort and stepped back so she could stand on it and call the standing her own, because that was what you did for someone you loved. You made the support invisible so the ease felt like hers. That was the part she stopped seeing. The apartment, his; the styling venture, his money. The effortless life she moved through, run by companies he owned and people he paid. She lived inside a structure he had built and assumed the structure was just the way the world arranged itself for a woman like her. And he let her, because he didn't need her to know the size of it. He only needed her to be honest about who she was. That was the one thing she chose not to be. Then, that spring. And everything changed. Theo was 33, easy to like, good-looking in an uncomplicated way, the driver the car service sent most often when Camille needed to be somewhere. Julian knew the arrangement. He reviewed the service's operations like he reviewed everything, at a distance, through reports. He had noticed, the way he noticed things, that Camille had begun requesting the same driver by name, that the billed hours had crept upward, that trips were logged to addresses that were not the addresses she told him. He had filed each of these away, quietly, without deciding yet what they meant. He told himself there were explanations. There usually were. He extended trust past the evidence, the way he always had, because believing the best of his wife had never before cost him anything. It was costing him now. Camille told him on a Sunday evening. She had rehearsed it. He could hear the rehearsal in the rhythm. She said she had tried to be happy. She said Julian was a good provider but a closed door, that she needed passion and presence, and a man who wasn't always somewhere behind his own eyes. She said she had fallen for someone who worked with his hands, who didn't have Julian's money but had something Julian had lost. She said his name was Theo, and that they were in love, and that she hoped, in time, Julian could be glad she'd found something real. She said she was sorry he had to hear it like this, which is not the same as I'm sorry. Julian did not raise his voice. He did not point out that the man who worked with his hands worked those hands on a steering wheel of a car Julian owned, because saying it then, in that kitchen, would have been a reaction, and reactions told people things. He set down his coffee cup, carefully, the way he set down anything he meant not to break, and he said the only thing he trusted himself to say. "I see," he said. He picked up his keys and drove himself, in the plain sedan, to the one place that had always told him the truth. He drove to the office of the man who had structured his entire empire, a semi-retired attorney named Garrett, who kept odd hours and answered his phone at strange times, and had never once added drama to heavy news. Garrett's office was above a bakery, and at that hour it smelled of bread proofing for the morning. Garrett poured 2 glasses of water and did not offer condolences, because Julian had not come for condolences. He had come because Garrett, alone among the people in his life, knew exactly how much there was to lose and exactly how it was held. "Tell me what you already know," Julian said. "Then tell me what I don't." What Julian already knew was the personal betrayal. What Garrett laid out over the next hour was the part underneath it, the part that turned a sad story into something with a spine. It had started, Garrett said, with the billing. The car service ran a monthly reconciliation that Garrett's office reviewed as a matter of routine, and 3 months ago a pattern had surfaced that did not fit. Camille's trips had stopped matching her destinations. A car booked to take her to a gallery opening would log 90 minutes at a residential address across town. A standing weekly appointment she described as a fitting was, by the GPS record, a parked car in a lot near the river. Garrett had not gone looking for an affair. He had gone looking for the source of an accounting irregularity, and an affair was simply what the numbers led to. He had said nothing, because a billing anomaly was not proof of anything a man wanted to be told about his wife. And Garrett did not bring Julian feelings. He brought him facts, and only once he had all of them. Camille had not simply fallen for the driver. 6 months earlier, she had begun moving money. Garrett had flagged it weeks ago and had been waiting, the way Garrett waited, until he had the whole picture before bringing it. Just over $90,000 had drained from the household accounts Julian funded into an account in Camille's name, and from there a portion had gone into a venture Theo was trying to start. A small fleet of his own, a car service to compete with the very company that employed him, the company Julian owned. The transfers had been careful, broken into amounts small enough to escape a glance. The way a person moves money when they have decided something and have not yet said it out loud. Camille was bankrolling the driver's attempt to go independent, using Julian's money to build a business that would compete with one of Julian's businesses, all while neither of them knew the man they were taking from owned both sides of the equation. There was a particular cruelty in the arithmetic that Julian noticed and did not comment on. The money she had used to fund a man who worked with his hands was money she had never once earned with her own. The passion she had described as the thing Julian could not give her was being financed, dollar for dollar, by Julian, through accounts he had filled and she had quietly emptied. He turned that over for a moment, the way he turned over a clause in a contract that was technically legal and entirely in bad faith, and then he set it aside. Because resentment was a reaction, and reactions told people things. Julian read the summary once. Then he folded it in half, and in half again, and set it flat on the desk. "There's more," Garrett said. To raise additional capital for Theo's fleet, Camille had begun representing herself, to a small equipment lender as a co-owner of assets that were not hers, using a vehicle and a lease that belonged to Julian's car service as collateral she had no right to pledge. She had likely believed it was harmless, that the paperwork was a formality, that no one would ever check whose name the assets truly carried. But she had, in plain terms, pledged Julian's property to fund the man she was leaving him for. She had done it without knowing it was his. The driver had done it without knowing it was his. The whole scheme was built, unknowingly, on the assets of the one man it was designed to escape. Julian looked at the lender's name on the document. He did not say anything. He had seen that lender before. It had financed equipment for two of his own companies. The world was smaller than Camille understood, and she had walked into the center of it certain it was wide open. He looked at everything on the desk. The siphoned $90,000. Theo's fleet. The pledged collateral that wasn't hers to pledge. The trips logged to wrong addresses. He could see the whole shape of it now. The way you see the structure of a deal once every party and every dollar is laid out in order. It was not a woman finding something real. It was a woman using his money and his property to fund a rival to his own business, on behalf of a man who worked for him, and calling the whole thing love. "What do you want to do?" Garrett asked. He thought about it for a long time. He set his hand flat on the folder. "Nothing yet," he said. He didn't move fast. That was the part neither of them could have accounted for. If he had wanted fast, it could have been done before Theo's headlights left the driveway that night. One call. The car service terminates a driver. The lender learns the collateral is fraudulent. The accounts freeze. Theo's little fleet dies in the cradle, and Camille's exit collapses before it begins. But Julian had spent 17 years learning a single principle, the one that had built everything he owned. You do not reveal what you control until controlling it quietly has done all the work it can do. Ownership announced is ownership challenged. Ownership held in silence simply shapes the outcome from underneath. So he would let the situation mature. He would keep his face the same. He would let them keep believing they were free of him, because their belief was the most useful instrument he had. So, he let it run. He did not fire Theo. He did not freeze the accounts. He let Camille move out, let her tell her friends she had chosen passion over comfort. Let Theo keep driving the company car, while quietly building the fleet meant to compete with the company that signed his checks. Julian watched it the way he watched everything, at a distance, through reports, patient, certain. A person who thinks they have escaped you will show you precisely what they intended to do with their freedom. And what they intended became clear within a month. Theo formally launched his independent fleet, using the pledged collateral to secure his first 3 vehicles, and immediately began soliciting the corporate clients of the car service. The steady, lucrative accounts that did not know, any more than Theo did, that the service and the new competitor were now both feeding off the same man. Camille put her remaining money into it, and her name on the marketing. She believed she was building something of her own, at last, with a man who saw her. She was building it on a foundation owned, lean to logo, by her husband. Garrett, who returned calls before dawn and never let his voice rise with the stakes, said only one thing when Julian asked how strong the position was. "Don't do anything yet," Garrett said. "Let him pitch your own clients. Let her sign the filings. The more they build, the more clearly it shows whose ground they built it on. Then you don't confront them. You simply let them find out." That was the variation that mattered to Julian. He did not want a scene. He did not want to stand in a room and reveal himself like a magician pulling back a curtain. He wanted them to discover, on their own, in the ordinary course of business, The thing that had been true the entire time. Justice that arrived as a consequence, rather than a confrontation. Truth they walked into, rather than truth he threw. So he arranged for the truth to be waiting where they would inevitably step. Theo's fleet pitched its biggest target 6 weeks in, a corporate account worth more than all his current business combined, an events company that needed a permanent transportation contract. Theo and Camille prepared for the meeting like it was the night that would change their lives. Garrett's office, which saw the inquiry come through, reported that Camille had personally assembled the pitch materials, had written the company's story herself. The story of a driver with a dream and a partner who believed in him. 2 people building something honest from nothing. She did not know how much of that story was already false. She believed every word of the part she could see. The events company asked, as such companies do, for references and for verification of the fleet's financing and ownership before signing. It was a standard request. No one ever expected it to matter. Theo submitted his financing documents without a second thought, because as far as he knew, the vehicles were his, the lease was his, the business was his. The events company was owned by Julian's holding group. Theo did not know it. Camille did not know it. The verification request routed, as all such requests in that group did, up a chain that ended at a desk Garrett oversaw. Julian did not attend the meeting. That was the point. He had thought carefully about how he wanted this to happen, and he had decided he did not want to be in the room. He had no desire to stand before them and pull back a curtain, to watch the recognition move across 2 faces, to perform the reveal like a man who needed to be seen winning. That was not justice. That was vanity wearing justice as a costume. What he wanted was quieter and more total. He wanted them to walk into the truth on their own, in the ordinary course of the business they were so proud of building, and find it already there, already true, having been true the entire time. So he let the verification come back, the way the truth comes back, when it has been waiting patiently to be asked. The events company's counsel informed Theo, in a flat and factual letter, that the collateral underpinning his fleet was encumbered by a prior ownership interest that he did not appear to control, that the assets traced to a parent entity, and that the contract could not proceed until the discrepancy was resolved. Attached was the ownership chain. It ran up through one entity and then another, the way Julian's holdings always did, each layer leading to the next without ever seeming to lead anywhere in particular. At the top of it, 2 layers up, was a holding company. And on the single document that named the holding company's principal, a document Theo had to read 3 times before it meant anything, because the first 2 times his mind refused the shape of it, was a name he knew. The name on the checks he had cashed for 2 years. The name of the husband. Theo called Camille. Garrett's account had it that Theo's voice on the phone had gone strange and thin. The voice of a man who has just understood that the ground he is standing on belongs to someone else. Camille did not believe him until she saw the page herself. The ownership chain printed in black and white. The name at the top of it, the name she had said across a kitchen, was a closed door. And then she understood, all at once and in the wrong room, that the car had always been his. That the money had always been his. That the clients they were chasing were his. That the man she had described as a closed door had been the floor under everything she thought she was escaping toward. She had not traded up. She had not even traded sideways. She had taken a life he built, handed it to a man who also worked for him, and called the handoff freedom. Julian was not there to see her face. He had decided, deliberately, not to be. But Garrett described the call that came afterward, the one Camille made to Julian's line, her voice moving in 90 seconds from disbelief to accusation to something close to pleading. Julian listened to the voicemail twice, not because it moved him, because he wanted to remember the exact shape of a woman discovering that the freedom she'd celebrated had been issued to her, all along, by the man she left. He returned her call once and kept it short, and said the only thing he intended to say. "You left me for my driver," he said, evenly, not cruel, simply precise. "You should have asked who he drove for." He ended the call. He did not call again. It did not happen all at once. Theo's fleet could not survive the discovery. The pledged collateral was withdrawn the moment its true ownership was established. The 3 vehicles repossessed by a lender that had financed them in error, the corporate contracts evaporating as word, moved through a small industry that the new fleet's foundation was built on assets it never owned. Theo lost the company he'd risked everything to start. And then, because the car service had every right to act on a driver who had pledged its property and solicited its clients, he lost the job that had been paying his rent. Julian did not have to destroy him. He simply stopped holding him up, and the thing fell, because there had never been anything under it but Julian. Camille was not ruined publicly. She was simply smaller. The $90,000 was largely gone into a venture that no longer existed. The man she'd chosen for his realness turned out to have nothing real underneath him either. Only a borrowed life he'd borrowed, without knowing, from her own husband. The styling clients she'd once had stopped calling when the glamour she traded on quietly dimmed. The invitations slowed. The calls she made began going to voicemail. She carried the weight of what she had chosen the way a person carries something they cannot set down. Not dramatically, just constantly. Julian was building something, not loudly. The way he built everything. He restructured the car service, kept its drivers, the honest ones, who had never once been told who signed their checks, and had behaved as if it didn't matter, which was exactly why it did. He promoted a dispatcher named Renata to run the company, a woman who had flagged the irregular billing months earlier and been thanked quietly, and never knew how much her noticing had mattered. He told her now. He did not forget the people who paid attention on his behalf without being asked. 14 months later, the holding group closed its largest acquisition yet, folding a competitor's fleet into the car service and doubling its corporate accounts, a transaction valued at the close in the low 9 figures. Julian attended the signing the way he attended most things, introduced to the room only as a member of the ownership group, unremarkable in a suit that cost less than people assumed. A young driver opened the car door for him afterward and called him sir without any idea who he was, and Julian thanked him by name because he had read the roster. Because he always read the roster. There was a small olive tree in a clay pot on the windowsill of his study, one Garrett's wife had sent him after the worst of it, with no card. Just the tree. He watered it on Sundays. On a cool evening in spring, a year to the season from the Sunday she had told him, Julian sat in the study with a glass of water and the quiet of a house that was entirely his. He listened to the city moving below, the traffic he partly owned the means of, the ordinary sound of a world running on structures no one could see. He thought, for a moment, about a man who worked with his hands on a wheel that turned a car that was never his, and about how small that whole spring looked now, the way a thing looks small once you understand you were never actually at risk of losing it. There was a new deal laid out on the desk, weighted at the corners, waiting for morning. He finished his water. He went to turn out the light, then left one burning, because the house was his, and he had nothing left to hide. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.